Una droga trinca son un chingo de pistolas. Pago la arma y a todos tienen tirados. Bien pendientes al llamado, las barbadas alineadas. Pasa que tiramos el ancla por acá, por la Tijuana. Hicimos veces con la rana y aquí les va todo el...
They've put them in acid and watched their bodies disintegrate. They have fed them to wild animals.
I mean, I've done the simple stuff that everybody starts doing. Pulling teeth out, fingers up, slowly, or...
This is for anyone who might think cartels are cool. Popular shows like Narcos can be misleading. We see ruthless men stopping at nothing to reach the top of the game. Maybe we see a quick scene too, but it's fiction, right? It doesn't really hit home. However, cartels are real world, and people are getting tortured to death every single day. What's worse, now they're getting recorded too. Over the last decade, cartels in Mexico normalized torture videos, and it's one of the worst things imaginable. In today's video, we'll examine some of the worst narco torture techniques ever recorded, and explore the context around these terrible videos. Trigger warning though, very graphic details ahead. Z40. Z40 is the army code of Miguel Trevino Morales, except Morales never had military training. He was the boss of the Los Zetas cartel at the time it broke off from the Gulf cartel and became a standalone criminal organization. Because of Morales and Los Zetas, videos became a thing in Mexico. Los Zetas brought a lot of novelty to the world of cartels, but none of it was positive. Los Zetas started out as the Gulf cartel's army. The Gulf's leader in the 1990s, Ociel Cardenas, hired an ex-military lieutenant, Arturo Guzman de Sina, aka Z1, to bring a new level of discipline to his empire.
The first set that he recruited was Arturo Guzman de Sena. So what you saw was a change in the way drug cartels fought with violence. It was no longer those gang members with shaved heads and tattoos fighting with pistols and knives. It was militarized style, fighting like military units. And once they did it, this was spread across to every cartel in Mexico.
Gang shootouts and small street fights were replaced with disciplined paramilitary units declaring war on each other. And with Los Zetas came an unprecedented kind of violence. De Sena brought along over 30 army deserters, all selected to be brutal and think nothing of attacking first.
So the Zetas really upped the ante of violence within their conflict and their use of terror. I think a lot of this comes from the fact they were from the military and they had this instruction of how you defeat insurgencies.
In the army, you learn to control insurgencies by use of terror. It's no secret that armies have their dark side too. But when you take the dark side and bring it to the cartel world, well, that's a marriage made in hell. The Zetas Army became so brutal that its generals rewarded violence with honor medals. In 2002, De Sena was killed by the Mexican military during the war on drugs. A few years later, Cardenas was arrested and extradited to the US. The government thought this might be the end of the Gulf cartel. But what happened was Los Zetas took charge as a standalone cartel and started an all-out war with the Gulf. Yep, it was pure chaos, and violence only skyrocketed after this. From 2010 to 2015, Los Zetas made a name as Mexico's most brutal cartel, leaving piles of mutilated bodies behind them wherever they went. And at the center of the terror was a man named Miguel Trevino Morales. He was born on November 18, 1970 in Tamaulipas into a family of 13 children. As one of the oldest brothers, Miguel took care of his family after his father abandoned him. Pressed for cash, he entered the criminal world as a young teen. During the 1990s, he worked for the Gulf cartel drug lord Hector Manuel Sauceda Gamboa, aka El Cariz, who became his mentor. In the late 1990s, Los Zetas hired him for his skills in moving contraband across the border. He'd lived between Mexico and Texas all his life, and this was his specialty. By 2005, Miguel's job was fighting off insurgents from the Sinaloa cartel in the Nuevo Laredo area. But that's not all he did. Apparently, Miguel was good at grooming young teens into brutal assassins. He called them Zetitas, little Zetas, and had them kill rival sicarios, officials, and anyone who got in the Zetas' way. Some of his Zetitas were 12 years old. Perhaps this explains how people can end up so desensitized to violence they can other people. In 2007, under his boss's orders, Miguel led a vicious ambush in Guatemala, personally killing notorious drug lord Juan Jose Leon Ordon that earned him the vice general position in Los Zetas, despite his lack of military training. By 2010, when Los Zetas became their own cartel, Miguel already had ambitions to be their leader. According to some sources, he was fighting for the kingpin position as early as Alberto took over. According to other sources, he was actually ruling Los Zetas, commanding their horrific attacks while the de facto ruler, Alberto Lascano, took care of more administrative matters. Whichever the case, both men had a great number of followers. When Alberto was gunned down by the Mexican military in October 2012, Miguel took over Los Zetas, but Z40's techniques were truly chilling. In August 2010, Z40 had Los Zetas kill 72 undocumented immigrants on a mere suspicion that they might end up recruited by the Gulf cartel. The next year, he stopped a group of buses headed from Texas to Mexico. Over 200 people were kidnapped and taken to the ranch in San Fernando. There, Miguel and his Zetas sicarios dozens of women, forced men to watch, then forced the men to fight each other to the death. Whoever survived would be recruited into the Los Zetas, and whoever died, well, they were tortured for hours first. All the while, Z40 would participate in this or stand by, watch, and laugh. For him, this was fun. It can be almost argued it was a pretext that he suspected the immigrants would be recruited by the Gulf cartel. Whichever chance he had to torture, rape, and kill, he took with open arms. In August 2011, Miguel's men set fire to a whole casino in Monterrey after a casino failed to pay protection money.
Here's a very small sample. Most of it is simply too grisly to show. There was the summary of 200 migrants. The casino fire, which killed at least 50. The preferred method of killing involves with chainsaws.
Then Z40 brought a new technique to Los Zetas.
They burn these individuals in a 55-gallon drum using diesel because diesel burns slower.
For Z40, the longer his enemies took to die, the better. And at a certain point in his shocking career, he became specialized in cooking his victims. In 2020, the Irish Times reported the discovery of 12 kitchens Los Zetas used to cook humans. The description itself is scarring enough. Bloody handprints on walls, stained clothes, plastic cable ties, machetes, and, as one person observes, the crunch of bones beneath a thick blanket of ash. If this is not stomach-turning enough, wait till you hear Z40 subjected his victims' families to the same treatment. Indeed, Miguel Morales boiled. He also murdered people while they were still alive and dumped their bodies in broad daylight for others to see and learn his name. Meanwhile, he discovered that if he wanted to instill fear in more people, he could use the internet to share grisly videos. Videos of people getting beaten and then thus became normalized. Whether this wouldn't have happened without Los Zetas or it's just a trend waiting to happen, we might not ever know. But it ultimately took on, and the Gulf cartel responded in the same fashion. Remember, the Gulf cartel was Los Zetas' sworn enemy at the time. So when they kidnapped a Zeta, they wanted him to pay in the worst way. In 2012, ABC News reported on a video posted by the Gulf cartel on the dark web. Each Zeta prisoner states his name for the camera, at the prompting of an unidentified voice behind the camera. When asked who sent them, each responds, Z40. You find yourselves here because you came to us, says the narrator of the video. After the hostages have finished speaking, pay attention, men. Then the slow and bloody process of f***ing their heads off begins. This is how your filthy people are going to end, says the narrator as the victims plead for mercy. This format, for a lack of a better word, when a victim is then their head is presented to the camera, became the norm for all cartels today, including the notorious Sinaloa and CJ&G cartels. On July 15, 2013, Miguel Trevino Morales was finally arrested, but the legacy he left behind outweighs his arrest.
They've put them in acid and watched their bodies deteriorate. They have fed them to wild animals.
Z40 to people's chests while they were still alive and removed their hearts, boiled alive, cannibalized his victims, and reportedly, once he put it in a microwave. Miguel Morales would spend the rest of his life in Michoacan prison, but it's safe to say he can't be rehabilitated to a point where he feels remorse for his actions. What sort of person can do the things he did and get a kick out of it? Sadly, several other people seem to do the same. El Mencho's Clowns.
Cartel de Jalisco Nueva Generación, CJ&G, is the single criminal organization most responsible for these deaths on both sides of the border.
The Jalisco New Generation cartel took the fight to the next level, shooting down a military helicopter with a rocket-propelled grenade.
Today, the CJ&G is considered Mexico's bloodiest cartel, and this is thanks to its leader, Namacillo Asegura Cervantes, aka El Mencho.
Tonight, the DEA is offering $10 million for information leading to the arrest of the Mexican drug kingpin known as El Mencho.
But El Mencho had a source of inspiration for his evil empire, and that was, of course, the Los Zetas cartel. While trying his luck in the drug trade in Mexico and the US, young Namacillo Cervantes also joined the police force in Michoacan. It wasn't long before he realized he didn't fit in there. Or maybe he never wanted to fit. He just wanted to learn the ropes of militarized attacks. Because as it turns out, what inspired El Mencho the most within the Zetas cartel was their paramilitary fighting style and their impeccable structure. Even though Zetas had actual army deserters, El Mencho trained them as though he was an actual army general himself.
And in July, footage would emerge of that CG&G convoy. These gunmen call themselves the Elite Group and pledge allegiance to El Mencho. They're armed with assault rifles with grenade launchers attached to the barrel, heavy machine guns, and also this gun. This is a .50 caliber sniper rifle. It's a powerful weapon that the CG&G loves to show off.
And much like any dictatorial army general, Mencho brainwashed his soldiers into revering him. They genuinely believed he is an honorable man with great intentions.
Yo sé quién es el patrón, señor Don Mencho, una persona muy honorable y las personas que lo conocen saben la calidad de persona que es.
There's a problem when you're willing to do anything for someone, and I mean anything. Of course, when they're asked about terrorism and use of terror, they all deny it.
Nosotros no nos dedicamos a eso. Nosotros nos dedicamos, somos narcotraficantes. Nosotros producimos, exportamos y vendemos droga. Eso es de lo que papá de nosotros hace el dinero. Esa es la empresa de nosotros.
The father also makes money by eating people alive. Sadly, you heard that right. Mencho's main method is intimidation, and this doesn't only happen with military equipment and threats to the government. This happens on a daily basis through murder and posting videos of these online. And Mencho recruits the worst people imaginable and grooms them into ultimate killing machines. Sometime in the 2010s, El Mencho recruited a horrible human being by the name of Fabián Urbino Morales, aka El Payaso. I know, the name Morales is really getting a bad rep in this video. El Payaso means the clown in Spanish. Creepily enough, Fabián Morales truly did work as a clown at the circus when he was younger. Then, he traded his clown suit for guns, machetes, and knives, but he kept the mask. Fabián Morales used to work for the Los Metros cartel, which was a smaller faction of the Gulf cartel. As you all know, the cartel world is violent, but El Payaso's penchant for psychopathic violence was shocking even for his fellow narcos. He had his very own clown army who would take pleasure in rival cartel members while wearing their scary clown masks. That's when El Mencho became interested in him. In this place, Mencho and his people recruited him when they saw the way they executed rivals. They burned them in gasoline drums.
They also prepare guisos. These are stews where you take a member of the family and you put them in a pig boiler and you pour gasoline on them and then you set a match to them.
Guisos were yet another technique developed by Los Zetas, but it's unclear whether this happened under Z40 or before, when Zetas was still part of the Gulf cartel. Whichever the case, El Payaso was a fan of this method, and if you thought this was chilling, wait till you hear how El Payaso blossomed under El Mencho's care. If Los Zetas made videos popular, the CJ&G made them a motto. For El Mencho, such videos are the perfect way to send the message that no one should mess with them. The more people watch it, the better. The problem is, in their eyes, anything means messing with them. If you look at them the wrong way, or El Mencho felt undermined by something you said, you can suffer the same fate as a Sicario. One of the worst things El Payaso and his clown army did is shown in the Quiero Agua video. In the video, the CJ&G clowns have kidnapped a rival cartel member, most likely a former member of La Familia. But the victim has never been identified, as the video begins with a flayed face. The 30-second video shows a man inches away from death after the clowns had already removed all skin from his face and other parts of his body. But this is not the only gruesome, blood-chilling part of the video. Something that shows the true nature of Morales and his gang is the way the men taunt their victim, mocking him and laughing at his pain. At one point, the men kept asking him if he wants water, but imagine having a talk without a face. The transcript reads as follows. Do you want water? Say it with your mouth. Yes, I want water. Do you know who I am? The man wheezes in pain. It's pretty clear he just wants to die. But the clowns keep taunting him, keeping him alive for as long as possible. His voice is raspy and weak, but this only amuses the clowns. Anyone watching this video could easily have a panic attack and years of sleepless nights. But these men were just laughing at it, almost as if they were proud of what they did. You can't call these people animals. Animals only kill to eat. They never for pleasure. It's hard to imagine what El Payaso went through as a kid to end up like this. Side note, please don't go looking for this video or other torture videos online. They are deeply traumatizing, and in the worst case scenario, you end up desensitized to real life brutality. Thankfully, El Payaso is now in prison, and it's unlikely he will ever walk free again. But some of his clown army is still out there, wreaking havoc and taking pleasure in destroying people's lives. El Payaso left a horrible legacy behind, and people alive is still a method Mexican cartels use today. CJ&G dismemberment. One fateful day, a group of sicarios from the Los Viagras cartel filmed themselves laughing at El Mencho, the leader of the Jalisco New Generation cartel, or the CJ&G. 24 hours later, the man filmed was captured and killed in the most brutal way imaginable. The whole ordeal was filmed and posted online, becoming one of the most infamous CJ&G videos to date. One of the CJ&G's enemy cartels is the Los Viagras. They began as a self-defense force in 2014 after Michoacan former security commissioner Alfredo Castillo Cervantes asked them to assist in the efforts to arrest the leader of the Knights Templar cartel. When the authorities tried to dissolve the group, Los Viagras took control of the municipal presidency. A shootout ensued to evict them, and 10 civilians lost their lives in the process. Since then, Los Viagras has slowly expanded in the Michoacan region, and the center of their game is trade. This puts them at great odds with the CJ&G, who also smuggle in the same region. For Mencho, the fight is personal. Michoacan is his home state. Only he can control the drug trade there. For almost a decade, CJ&G and Los Viagras have been fighting to the death over territory. And some of these fights end up in the most brutal way imaginable. Trigger warning, the next few minutes will deal with the incredibly gruesome death of a Los Viagras member. If you don't want all the details, you can skip ahead 2 minutes. The video begins with a Los Viagras member captured and chained by his neck. He is held in a torture chamber by 2 CJ&G sicarios, both wearing masks and combat vests and armed to their teeth. One of the men talks to the camera and says, "I send my regards to all of you who keep acting out, especially you, Gordo and Chava. Look at how I got your people. Look at them. Is this what you want? You do know him, yes? You better step up your game." By Gordo, he is referring to the Los Viagras kingpin, Nicolas Sierra Santana, aka El Gordo. As he says this, the victim is heard in the background, whimpering and pleading for his life. But by then, he probably knew there was no chance he was getting out alive. It's more likely he was pleading for a quick death, but that wasn't going to happen either. As soon as the CJ&G sicarios stopped talking, he took out a large hunting knife and the man's left leg at the knee. Then he beat the man with his own leg and mocked him for claiming to be tough before. As the victim cried and begged him to stop, the sicario replied, "What do you mean no more? This one's for you, Chava, just so you can see how I have your people. Look at how I have them." Within a few seconds, the second leg came off. As he beat his victim with it, the men laughed on the camera, urging El Chava to keep sending his men to Nueva Italia, a restaurant where they found and kidnapped this victim. In the same manner, the sicario proceeds to remove both the man's arms, all the while laughing, mocking him for being part of Los Viagras and threatening the cartels as bosses. The worst part? All the way until the very end, the victim is fully conscious. It's highly possible that the sicarios pumped him full of drugs beforehand, making sure he felt every second of it. And this is not the only horrific detail. It's also unimaginable that someone can take pleasure in doing such a thing to another human being. The men are laughing as they completely their victim in under 3 minutes. It's clear they have done this before and they are completely desensitized to extreme violence. Not only do they not care for someone else's suffering, they are proud of their line of work. If prison wasn't a risk, they would probably show their faces to the camera too. They feel no shame or remorse. They are true, real-life monsters. The video ends with a bit that the sicarios filmed before killing their victim. The man is shown still fully clothed, talking about his regrets about joining Los Viagras. He says that the Los Viagras cartel is nothing and praises the CJ&G. Of course, he was forced to say this. As Mencho uses torture videos as a way to instill fear in people, he sends a simple message: join me or die. If you're not with me, you're against me. So many smaller cartels are intimidated into joining the CJ&G. This is how El Mencho grows his cartel and becomes even more frightening. Los Chapitos. This last one didn't come in a video, but at the trial of Ovidio Guzman, El Chapo's son. El Chapo isn't a stranger to participating in torture himself. During his 2017 trial, it was revealed that he took pleasure in personally his victims. In 2006, El Chapo's men brought a rival cartel member to one of his mountain hideouts to interrogate him about his cartel. When he arrived at El Chapo's place, the man was already covered in burns, made with a cigarette lighter and a clothing iron. El Chapo complained about his condition, then proceeded to put him on ice in a chicken coop and leave him there for days, until his wounds began to fester. We told Mr. Joaquin that this man had a bad odor because he was decomposing in a way. Every now and then, El Chapo would ask him questions about his cartel. When the man didn't give the answer that El Chapo wanted to hear, El Chapo would shoot him, but not in a lethal area. Only after the man was more a zombie than a human being was El Chapo ready to kill him. He had men dig a hole and then dragged the prisoner to the hole's edge. After asking him a bunch of questions, El Chapo cursed the man, shot him, and pushed him into the hole. The prisoner was still alive, gasping for air when El Chapo's sicarios buried him, and El Chapo watched, proud of himself. A year later, El Chapo received a gift from his sicarios, 2 Los Zetas men. According to Min, El Chapo personally beat them for hours until they were limp as rag dolls. They were completely like rag dolls. Their bones were totally broken. They could not move. And Mr. Joaquin was still with the branch and his weapon too. Meanwhile, El Chapo had his sicarios prepare the men's deaths. Guzman ordered his men to dig a hole, Valdez said, and fill it with wood and get a fire going. Then tying the Zetas to the back of 2 ATVs, then drove the prisoners to the edge of the pit where the pistoleros had gotten a raging fire going and dumped them on the ground. The men were conscious. They looked afraid. Guzman, holding an assault rifle, hopped off the ATV and put the shortened barrel of the carbine to one Zeta's head and screamed, "A chingar a tu madre," or "Your mother," Valdez said. El Chapo then pulled the trigger. It gets even more gruesome. The second day after New Year's 2010, 36-year-old Hugo Hernandez was kidnapped from the Sonora state and taken to one of El Chapo's hideouts and houses. A few days later, his torso was found in a plastic container in Los Mochis. Another box had his arms, legs, and skull. But this was still light compared to what the city hall workers found that day. Hernandez's face to a football was left in a plastic bag near City Hall. A note read, "Happy New Year, because this will be your last." Reportedly, El Chapo had dismembered Hugo's body, removed his face, and stitched it onto a football himself. Who even knows how much of this treatment poor Hugo was subjected to while he was still alive? El Chapo also specialized in keeping his victims alive for the longest time possible. This was done as early as the 1980s. El Chapo used to work for the Guadalajara cartel, ruled by Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo and Rafael Quintero. This was the first modern-day cartel. And when they kidnapped DEA agent Kiki Camarena, they tortured him for 2 days straight, while a doctor kept resuscitating him to feel every bit of pain. This awful act brought on the end of the Guadalajara. The DEA rained hell on them, and within a few years, there was nothing left. But El Chapo had learned the ropes of the drug trade, and, of course, from the Guadalajara kingpins. El Chapo also passed on his learnings. In a creepy twist, he groomed his own sons into torturers and murderers.
Judy, they are known as Los Chapitos, the 4 most trusted sons of the world's most notorious drug kingpin. As the I-Team has reported for several years, federal drug investigators here in Chicago consider El Chapo's sons in charge of the Sinaloa cartel that remains this area's largest trafficker of cocaine and meth.
El Chapo knew that just like any other drug lord, he will end up in prison or dead, and he wanted someone he can trust to take over the business in the event of that happening. Who better than his own family? On January 5th, 2023, his son Ovidio was arrested a second time. During his trial, it was revealed that Ovidio and his brothers truly did take El Chapo's torture techniques and even took them to a whole new level. Once information was obtained by these captives, typically through these individuals were killed, either by or at the direction of the Chapitos themselves, and the bodies disposed of throughout the area. While many of these victims were shot, others were fed dead or alive to tigers. Feeding victims alive to starving wild animals is wrong on so many levels. First of all, you have a wild animal kept against its will in chains, mistreated, and starved so that it eats people. Animals have feelings too, and they should be free. Second of all, stating the obvious, but dying at the claws and teeth of a tiger or hippo is one of the worst ways to die. Los Chapitos weren't the first to do it. Pablo Escobar was set to do it, and so did Roberto Lascano, the leader of the Los Zetas in the early 2010s. Roberto actually said he loved watching how the body was torn apart when one of his victims was thrown into his tiger cage. Much like his pals E40, he was entertained by others' suffering. Los Chapitos developed their own torture techniques too. For approximately 2 hours, members of the Chapitos tortured victim 5 by inserting a corkscrew into victim 5's muscles. it out of his muscles and placing hot chilies in his open wounds and nose before being shot by Ivan Archibald Guzman Salazar, the indictment alleges. The victim and his fellow slain officer were then dumped near a motel off the highway near the ranch. Honestly, it's hard to imagine how people can even think of doing this to someone else, let alone actually do it. One thing is clear, violence leads to more violence, and Narcos make sure their legacy continues by recruiting and grooming young, vulnerable people into desensitized monsters. Few people are born this way. Most are brainwashed and forced into a life of unspeakable crime. But if all narco dealers recruit more people for their sick army, will the violence ever stop? Thanks for watching, guys. What do you think about narco techniques? Did we miss any? Let me know in a comment, and before you leave, make sure you like, subscribe, and hit that bell button. See you next time.